Hello there, my name is Saniya Choudhry, and I am an intern at the Westford Museum, an upcoming senior at Westford Academy and the president of the Westford Museum Club. Today I'll be talking with Geoff Hall, a fellow member of the Westford Historical Society and one of our current Westford Academy trustees. We will be walking through the history of a trustee and how the role has changed over time. So my first question, Mr. Hall, is what is a Westford Academy trustee today?
Today, okay. Well, the role is a lot different from the original trustees. Basically, what we are is the overseers of an endowment fund from people who have contributed to the Academy over the years. And from this endowment fund, we give a school gift every year. We give books to the National Honor Society, senior members, and we also give out scholarships. It comes to about $80,000-$85,000 each year that we contribute.
When were the trustees first founded?
Well, you got to go back to a gentleman by the name of Zacchaeus Wright. Zacchaeus Wright's family, the Wright family, was very famous in town. Well known, and from my estimations, they must have been a very prominent family at the time when Zacchaeus came up with the idea of a secondary school. What you began to see after the original secondary schools were the Latin schools, but they were more or less just kind of catering to the elite. Towards the end of the 18th century, there was a movement towards what we call the Age of Academies. And during the 19th century, that's what you would call the Age of Academies. But Zacchaeus Wright felt a secondary education beyond the common education that you would have gotten from one of the schoolhouses in town. There were 7 original school districts. There should be some sort of a secondary education. So he, along with several other prominent people, in 1792 formed a group with the idea of creating an academy.
So we know what the Westford Academy trustees do today. What was their initial purpose back in 1792?
Well, back in 1792 and all the way up to the end of the 19th century, and I'll talk specifically the year 1895, their role was to run the academy. They hired the preceptor or the principal. They hired the teachers. They built the original building that we know today as the museum. They were the ones that constructed the second, which is the Rodenbush. They as I said, they provided us the textbooks, and so they were basically like you might say a school committee is today, and that was their purpose.
Did someone have to live in Westford to be a trustee?
As a matter of fact, in the original legislation, it said that a majority of people could not live in Westford.
Oh, wow, that's
okay. The majority of people who were on the trustees, it could be some from Westford, but the majority of them would not be from Westford, and there was a purpose for that. They wanted it wasn't just for Westford residents, although many Westford residents did attend the school, but they wanted to go outside of the community and get people from Dracut, from Bedford, from Concord, and usually found a prominent individual in any one of these towns that might attract people and tell people they should go, kind of as an ambassador as well. But that changed in 1847. The law changed so that they didn't have to have a majority back then.
And nowadays, do you have to live in Westford to be a trustee still? Or?
No, absolutely not. We prefer those, if you looked at what are the requirements today, we're looking for people that were associated with the academy. We've had, I'm a former student, but we've had former principals and teachers, or been associated with the Westford school system. Kevin Regan, for example, was a 1973 graduate of Acton Boxborough, was not associated with the academy, but was a principal in town for years, and adds a certain dynamic to the board.
Speaking of requirements, are there any current requirements to be a trustee?
No, not actually. What we are now looking for is where people who might specialize in the field of finance, for example, the finance committee, to help the treasurer, because we are overseeing a board. That's our main purpose. I don't come with that sort of a background, but I come with a background of leadership positions. I've served as the president twice. I'm now the vice president. I serve on the archives committee with my interest in history.
Were there any requirements to be a trustee when the trustee board was first founded?
When it was first founded, as I said, other than you didn't have to have any educational requirements, not a college degree or things like that. But I think what they were looking for back then was prominent people within their own communities, as I stated before.
So you mentioned that the role of the trustee eventually changed. What do you think really caused it to change?
Well, it is, as I said, they were the school committee. They did the hiring, firing, raised the money for the educational purposes to run the academy. But in 1895, the Mass Legislature passed a law requiring that all towns have a high school. And so you began to see the transition of turning all of those things over to the local school committees. I'm going to say by 1912 and 1913, they were still paying for the upkeep of the building, the janitors, hiring the principals, I believe. But by 1928, they had sold Academy to the town, and basically that's when we have the status we have today as overseers of the endowment.
Now, I know that you specifically have been president twice and you're vice president now. Are there any other officer levels in the trustee board? Or
Well, there's an auditor position as well. Then there are subcommittees beyond that, specializing in things. Like I said, I'm with the archives committee. When I first got on the board, we rotated those positions, and now that's not a requirement that it be done. So our bylaws have changed over the years, suiting the needs of the times.
Have these officer levels and like the president, vice president, treasurer, and the different committees, have these always been a part of the trustee board, or are they a more
I believe so. The top officers, president, vice president, the treasurers, yes, have been, of course, one of the most important ones. And we have Ryan Dunn, who was vice president at the Enterprise Bank, so he comes with a banking background, and that's the type of person you're looking for. Just that. So those major positions have not changed.
Now, one thing
Their duties may have changed, though.
Yeah. One thing that sticks out to me about Westford Academy is that it's called Westford Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that the trustees, or why do you think the school still has its academy next to its name?
My understanding is that in the early part of the 20th century, there was actually a town meeting vote. I'm saying 1913 or 14, and I could be wrong as to the year, but said it had to that it would remain Westford Academy. I was also under the understanding that it had something to do with the idea of giving away awards, that those scholarships that we call today were called awards, and it was for financial reasons. Somebody with a greater legal mind than mine could explain it to you.
I know that the town of Westford has really boomed in population from over the past century or so. What are the different forms that the building of Westford Academy has taken?
Well, let's start with the museum.
Oh, yeah.
that was here, and it housed, I'm going to say, somewhere between 30 and 40 students initially when it first opened. In the end of the 20th century, the 19th century, in 1897, what we now know as the Rodenbush Community Center was built and replaced the what we now call the museum. By the mid part of the 20th century, the town had grown and was growing, and that's when the Abbott School was built. By that time, it was out of the hands of the trustees, and of course, in 1974 is when present Westford Academy opened. But even the addition on that was some 25 years ago. The back portion of it was extended. So I'd say that was Westford Academy 5, the one you see today, 4 and 5. But growing needs. I mean, you still had a population in the early part of the 20th century that was 2,000, 3,000, and now you're up to 23, 24,000.
Well, I was researching the Westford Academy Trustees and looking at the different names of the trustee members. One thing that stood out to me is that a lot of them were men. And so when did the WA Trustees expand from being a fully male-dominated field to being a more diverse one like it is today?
When you say you saw a lot of males, they were all males.
Yeah.
And they were until 1976, I believe, when Betty Hook was a history teacher, head of the social studies department. My U.S. history teacher, as a matter of fact. She went on to become town clerk in town, swore me in as a selectman in 1983, but she was the first woman trustee. She broke the glass ceiling, you might say. Mickey Crocker, who just recently passed away, was one. We now have Ellen Rainville, of course. Quite frankly, I've made a statement to the board that I think we need to be more diverse, and we need to be looking at, we need to be looking at not just female candidates, but others too.
And how do you think that Betty Hook's involvement with the Westford Academy Trustees kind of shifted the town or the board in general?
Well, it was more reflective of what the community, let's face it, 50% of the community was female. So you want the board to look something like the community. And I thought that certainly was a move in the right direction. And for someone to break that glass ceiling, there was no better choice than Betty Hook, believe me. When I got on the board, it was Mickey Crocker who actually asked me. And back then, you just wrote a letter and, you were accepted on the board. I think they add a different dimension to it, absolutely.
Are there any really famous or notable trustees besides yourself? I mean,
I wouldn't call myself notable. I mean, I look at Zacchaeus Wright. You go into the library at the high school, right? And what's the name of the library?
J.V. Fletcher Library?
No, I'm talking the one at the high school. Yeah.
Is it the Wright Library?
Yes, the Zacchaeus Wright. Yes. Yeah. The Zacchaeus Wright Library. And I think a lot of students know or see that emblem on the outside of the library, but don't have any idea who this gentleman was. And I think they should, quite frankly. There's one that comes to mind. In John Long, for example, was a preceptor and later went on to become Secretary of the Navy, and he was the one responsible for getting the cannon and the cannonballs on the common. But one that comes to mind that a lot of people don't know about is General Joseph Bradley Varnum of Dracut. He was, once again, outside of Westford, but he had a military career, very successful and prominent military career. But he went on to serve as the state representative, went on to Congress, then to the Senate, was President pro tem, and actually on December 16th, 1813, was appointed as the acting vice president of the United States for 4 months.
Wow.
Acting vice president, Westford Academy. So, his name comes to mind.
What would you say, looking through the entire history of the trustees, was the trustees' biggest contribution to its students?
Well, the first thing you would say, the trustees, and I'm going back to Zacchaeus Wright in the originals, was pointing to the importance of a secondary education. Go beyond just reading, writing, and arithmetic that you would have learned in the different district schools around town. So seeing the importance of education, that was their contribution. Today, it's the scholarships that we give, and still emphasizing the importance of getting an education and continuing your education.
How would you suggest that students become more involved with their trustees? Because I know that most students, they don't really know that we have trustees, or they don't really know what they do.
Well, I guess how they find out is, usually you find out as you become a senior, because you're then looking at scholarships, and there are, close to 100 different trustee scholarships from different families who have placed their endowment in the hands of the trustees. So I think it's important because Westford Academy is unique like that. Chelmsford, where I taught for years, taught at the high school, has an alumni association. Westford had an alumni association as well, and many do, but don't have trustees. And I think because we are special and we have that endowment, and it's such a big part of what Westford Academy is, it's important for people to know that.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Hall, for taking the time to walk through the changing role of the trustee. Westford Academy has a long history, so I thought it was very valuable to learn about one of its oldest traditions.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.